One of the ideas that I've been developing since my version 1 days is I would get on the phone with clients and I would talk about the need to be able to respond to change. And what I kind of learned was that there's this huge group of people in the world that don't want to respond to change. What they want is predictability. When you talk to your executives and say, do you think your executives want predictability or the ability to respond to change? Make and meet commitments, but I can throw anything at you I want, anytime I want. Right? They probably want both, don't they? Right? So the realization that we want to do when we're thinking about Agile and Agile transformation is this idea to recognize that predictability and the ability to change compete with each other. Markets have a similar kind of a thing. There's a lot of companies, and companies like Google and Facebook and web-based kind of properties, right? Those things kind of come to mind in the sense that the feature set can emerge based upon our evolving understanding of the market. The other side of that spectrum are things like what I would envision to be like government contracts, tax software, right? There's a lot of ability to inspect and adapt within that, but you kind of largely know what it is that you're trying to build. You're converging on a specific outcome. And the challenge with Agile, right, when you're trying to do Agile in a convergent kind of way, is you're using iterative and incremental delivery to be able to reduce risk and to be able to fine-tune what it is that you're building. It's not that we don't know what we want, it's just that we're using iterative and incremental delivery to fine-tune into it. And so as we started to kind of think through this, right, realize there's a little 2x2 quadrant. So when you know you're like a really professional management consultant is when you develop your own 2x2 quadrant. Okay, just want to let you know. And so in the lower left quadrant, I started writing blog posts about the idea of predictive convergent companies kind of as traditional waterfall and adaptive emergent. And my first thought was, part of the reason why we are struggling to introduce Agile ideas is because as Agilists, we tend to value the upper right quadrant, adaptive, figure it out as you go. The companies that we are in tend to value predictive convergent, right? They don't only value it, they're built for it. So there's big PMOs in these organizations, right, that are making governance decisions, right? You're built for it. The audit requirements mandate it, okay? So what we had to do is I was thinking through, like, okay, so how would you sell Agile? How would you convince somebody in the predictive convergent quadrant that they wanted to be in the adaptive emergent quadrant? And that's a tough sell. But then once you kind of start to think about this, what I kind of realized is that it was this 2x2, and we could do these 4 quadrant things, and I started to explore what the other 2 quadrants look like. So we had this idea of the predictive emergent. I'm built for predictability. I do annual planning. I have 18-month project plans and roadmaps and all this kind of stuff. But stuff is changing around me all the time. And so as Agilists, what we say the answer to that is that we want to go to the upper right quadrant. We want to go from upper left to upper right. And a lot of times we'll run pilots in the upper right quadrant, create teams, give them clear backlogs. It's greenfield, so they have the ability to do working tested software every sprint. We exercise the processes of Scrum. Life is good, everything works. And then we take those processes, because we think it was the processes that gave us the agility, and we apply them back into our predictive emergent world. And Scrum doesn't work in that world. Okay, it's incongruent. And so what we started to think about was, what does the journey look like, right? What are the 4 different quadrants? So we have this upper left quadrant, which is I'm built for predictability, stuff's changing all around me. That tends to be very ad hoc, chaotic, heroic, irrational, insane, right? I mean, just it's interesting, right? The lower left quadrant is where traditional tends to live, right? The lower right quadrant is where Agile tends to live. Well, so how can I be adaptable but still make and meet commitments? Well, the answer to that question is smaller batches, right? We all set out when we do a sprint to deliver what we planned in the sprint planning meeting. Right? That's just, we're trying to make and meet a commitment against a fixed scope. So we fix time, we fix cost, and we're trying to hit a specific scope within that time box. Right? Because we want the ability to change, we just create more breakpoints in the system so that we can inspect and adapt and pivot, right? Upper right's a totally different game altogether. That is the quadrant of experimentation. That's the quadrant of R&D. That's the quadrant of lean startup. And so part of the conversation that we have to have is, what is the value system of the company that you're in, And what are the attributes of the organization that are going to force me to be in one quadrant or the other? Different parts of the organization are going to be in different quadrants. Different parts of the organization are going to need to move to different quadrants for different reasons. Different parts of the organization are going to have different constraints based upon their technology stacks and such. So what you're going to end up is you're going to end up having to tailor your methodology around the quadrant you're in, the quadrant you want to be in, and the constraints that you're trying to overcome.